One day, out of the blue, in a sophomore religion class I was teaching, one of my students raised her hand, and in the sweetest way possible, as if she was really concerned about God's mental health, she asked, "Mr. Sweeney, before creating us, was God lonely?" After the laughter died down, I told her what a great question that was, and then I used it to launch into this brilliant explanation of the doctrine of the Trinity. I used her insightful question to explain to the class how God is three persons in an intimate union of perfect love. And that's why, before all eternity, before creating us, God is never lonely. When I was done with this brilliant explanation, I saw another hand go up. "Mr. Sweeney, but then doesn't that mean God is schizophrenic?" Well, no, but it will take a whole other blog for me to explain how God, who is three persons in one God, is not schizophrenic, or at least not bad at math. Was God lonely? It seems like a silly question, but actually it's quite profound. Some of the greatest theologians of history, including someone like Karl Barth, who many consider the greatest Protestant theologian of the 20th century, have actually addressed this question. See, if God is a solitary being, a single person, that means that before there was ever any kind of creation, there was no one there for him to love. In other words, he wouldn't be capable of love. He couldn't love, because love is something that exists in relationship between persons. It means that God, before creating us, would have been lonely. So in order for God to be capable of love, for God to be a God of love, he would need a creation in order to love. He would need a creation in order to fulfill that desire to love and to be loved, to be praised, worshiped, and adored. He would be dependent on us to fulfill a need in himself. So creating us would ultimately be about fulfilling his need to love and to be loved. And that means that as a solitary God, he really wouldn't be capable of love, not genuine love, love that is free and unconditional. There would always be strings attached to his love, because he would always be somehow dependent on us to be a God of love. In other words, ultimately, he wouldn't really be loving us, but using us somehow to be made complete, to be fulfilled, to fulfill the deep need he felt in himself. See, with a solitary God, that God can't really be a God of love, a God of unconditional love. He can't love us genuinely and freely. Only a God who is a communion of persons, a communion of love, who is completely fulfilled in himself and doesn't need us, isn't dependent on us for love, only that kind of God can love us freely and unconditionally. Think of it this way. Think of a person who has a child. In order to fulfill some kind of need they have, a need for love or fulfillment or happiness, they're always dependent on that child to fulfill that need, to make them whole. And the child feels the crushing weight, the crushing burden of being depended on to fulfill those needs, of having to fulfill the need for love or fulfillment or happiness in their parent. In a sense, ultimately, that parent is only using the child to fulfill a deep need in themselves. They're not really loving them. That's how it works with a solitary God. But then think about a couple who is madly in love with each other, who is completely fulfilled in each other's love, but who simply wants to share that love, let that love flow out from themselves to a new life. So they bring a new child into the world to share that love with that child. They're in no way dependent on that child to be fulfilled, so they can love that child freely, unconditionally, genuinely. That's how it is with the Trinity, with the God who is completely fulfilled in God's self. He can love us freely and unconditionally. And that's why it matters enormously so whether or not God is a Trinity. See, if God isn't a Trinity, then God can't be a God of love. If God isn't a Trinity, then he's dependent on us to fulfill some deep need in himself. If God isn't a Trinity, then before all creation, God was lonely. So as much as the Trinity might mystify us, how God could be three persons in one God, if God isn't a Trinity, then God can't be a God of love either. But because God isn't lonely, because before creating us, God wasn't lonely, that means that God is able to love us freely, genuinely, unconditionally. Because God was never lonely before creating us, that means that we never have to be lonely either. In him, we are never alone. So how do you make sense of the Trinity, the fact that God is three persons in one God? Or do you? Do you reject it completely? Let me know what you think by going to the Contact EJ page of the Raising Jesus website and leaving your comments and thoughts there. I'd love to hear from you. Also, please like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please keep telling your friends about us. Thank you.